Greetings from Tokyo, my dear friends. This is Daisuke, and I very much hope that this video finds you well and in very good spirits wherever you are in the world. And today, if you don't mind, I would very much like to continue on with our discussions, our discoveries, our journeys, and our explorations with respect to the recent releases made by the Criterion Collection during this year of 2022. And that brings us to a title which has been designated by Criterion at spy number 1116. This is a work from 1965, and the filmmaker is Robert Aldrich. And the name of the work is The Flight of the Phoenix. This is the work from 1965, and it is from the great legend, filmmaker, artist, Robert Aldrich, and it has a legendary, spectacular cast to boot, included in which are, for example, Peter Finch and Ernest Borgnine and Dan Duryea and Ian Bannon and George Kennedy and Richard Attenborough, and starring James Stewart as the seasoned, veteran, experienced, and weathered pilot, who is Frank Towns, in this epic adventure, disaster survival film that is so brilliant and so thrilling. And it's also very moving and quite an engaging work. And it's this film, The Flight of the Phoenix. There are many things I think one can say about The Flight of the Phoenix, one of which is, of course, the very intriguing plot. The plot involves a group of people, a group of men in this ensemble that happen to be part of the passenger group of this flight, this plane that is being flown by the crew, included in which is the pilot, the James Stewart character. And almost immediately, they run into some sudden and emergency and quite disastrous circumstances that lead to this flight, this plane, crashing into the middle of the desert, the Sahara. And so already we have the makings of a very taut and quite suspenseful adventure film epic. And that is, I think, the basis or the great foundation of this cinematic thrilling work, because already we have a number of threads, plot threads being developed. First, we have the having to handle and cope with certain elements of human drama and tragedy that befall a number of the characters due to, say, for example, injuries sustained from the crash itself, whether or not these injured persons will survive, how will they be nursed back to health, etc. So that is one aspect of the human drama that also adds to the suspense or tension, the limited amount of time, especially because these are men that are essentially stranded in the middle of the desert under these harsh environmental circumstances and situations, and with limited supply, including limited water, etc., as well as limited medical supplies. And so this adds to the critical mass that is going to be reached if nothing is done for these injured persons. So that's one aspect. Another aspect of the film is also, as I mentioned, the fact that this is a group of men that are stranded under these incredibly harsh circumstances, and with, as I say, limited supplies. And so will they be able to get out of this very difficult situation? This therein lies this idea of the survival film and the disaster film, because this is an ensemble group, and unfortunately, due to certain plot circumstances that we are privy to as viewers, perhaps some some characters might or might not make it out alive. And so that forms part of the engagement of suspense and tension. and we as viewers are automatically feeling quite concerned and intent on seeing the stories of these characters follow through to the very end. So that becomes a very captivating and quite maybe tense-filled aspect of this film. And also in these particular circumstances, we have another among other plot points or thematic developments occurring. So first of all, or in addition to those, we also have the ways in which these group of people are trying, therefore, to develop and plan and come up with possible ways of getting out of this particular situation. And so that means either some characters may be trying to venture out, seeing if there are any places nearby that can provide sources of rescue, or maybe sources of, say, much needed supplies and nourishment, etc. Water, etc. is very, very limited in these harsh circumstances. So that is one thing, trying to venture out and seeing what is out there and seeing if there's any hope of rescue. Now that this leads to another set of, say, harsh circumstances, because, as I say, they are stranded in the middle of the desert, and so that leads to some very suspenseful engagements in terms of subplot in that area, and what various characters, like, say, the Peter Finch character and other characters, run into and try to handle. So that's one aspect. Another aspect too is, or another way in which these characters are trying to develop plans to get out of this situation, does involve the wreckage of the plane, and does involve trying perhaps to consider the possibility of maybe being able to design a some kind of aircraft vehicle based off of the pieces from the wreckage of the plane, and in order to construct something that might or might not be able to get them out of this circumstance. And this brings to the fore the wonderful plot or subplot and tension involving the Hardy Kruger character and also the other crew members, including, or the other members of this particular group, including James Stewart's pilot, Frank Townsend. So there is automatically a sense of tension, a sense of frustration, a sense of stress, because this is an incredibly, extremely stressful situation. Again, life and death stakes. People might die at any moment unless something is done. And this is hoping beyond hope, in a manner of speaking. So this becomes, therefore, a film about a mission or a series of missions, tasks that people in groups or individually need to work out, little subplots, subtasks that accumulate to form, hopefully, some kind of whole that will be the means by which, hopefully, these men who are stranded in this situation might hope to possibly be able to escape from this particular situation. So will they or won't they succeed? That is one of the sources of suspense. Even though they might be able to succeed technically, will their human emotions get the better of them? Because there are, as I say, because of this extremely stressful situation and all these different characters that are occupying this space, there is room for a lot of explosive tension and rivalries and back and forth and backstabbing and betrayals, and also selfish egos might get in the way. And so this is, I think, part of the backbone of the drama, because, again, this is one of another great source of the dramatic tension is the clashes between these characters. But I don't want to give the impression that we only have clashes. There are also moments of, say, a revealed loyalty, friendship. There are also moments of sincere type of connection, even in the face of perhaps almost certain death. And so this also brings to the fore this lovely sense of engagement. And so we have this push and pull, this back and forth, this ebb and flow, if you will, between this type of human engagement in these maybe tense and confrontational terms on the one hand. I think perhaps most emblematic in some of the confrontations that we have, again, between, say, for example, Hardy Kruger's character and James Stewart's character on the one hand, and also by extension with Richard Attenborough's character and the like. And then we have the other characters as well, Ian Bannon, George Kennedy, etc., coming into the fore, connected in this network of group, this network of this group of men on the one hand, this kind of confrontational aspect. But on the other hand, there are moments of real connection, that occur. And when those moments of connection happen, they are glorious. They are uplifting. They are these great, almost heroic, exhilarating action adventure moments. And again, we can use as same or similar examples. So maybe the possibility of some kind of self or some mutual respect. And again, I can bring to the table the example of the characters of Frank's House, or the James Stewart character and the Hardy Kruger character as an example. So these become, I think, part of the engines, if you will, the modes, if you will, of this film that this film is operating on in order to bring us, the viewer, into its landscape. And my goodness, what a thrilling, epic landscape this is. We have the backdrop, of course, of the desert and the sun and the brilliant and devastating nature of the environment itself, which is itself a kind of key character. And we also have the feelings of guilt and the internalization of a lot of the tragedy and the intensity of the situation. I think this also brings a great opportunity for Robert Aldrich and company to show us not just the external types of expressions, but also the internal frustrations and the internal emotional battles, if you will, the psychological battles, if you will, that each of the characters seems to be feeling. And again, I can bring as a great example James Stewart's performance here. There is a lot on his character's shoulders. And we get a sense of that both in terms of his outward expressions towards the other men in the group, and also internally because of the weight that he feels on his shoulders, being the pilot of this particular group or passengers or expedition, etc. So there is so much of the external, there's so much of the internal, there's so much of the action, adventure, suspense, and there's so much of the human drama, conflict, and connection. There is, of course, within the realm of the action, there is the suspense drama, there is the camaraderie between these men. And then there is also the survival and disaster film aspect to this, as well as being potentially a very triumphant and very exhilarating work indeed. And I must say too that in that spirit, while there are moments of maybe a dire solemnity, on the one hand, there are also moments of lightness and brevity. There are moments, as I say, of that camaraderie coming through. Even in these very dire situations, a lot of these characters are able to laugh and are able to have a certain sense of, say, hope. As I mentioned earlier, maybe it's hope beyond hope. But again, one has to watch the film to the end to see whether they will indeed succeed in their mission or not. But the point also is the idea of instilling a sense of hope. And in that, maybe we see characters that are trying to joke or laugh because that's the only thing they can do in order to keep their spirits up. So it's always applied in a way that is never inconsistent with the dire situation that these characters find themselves in, but at the same time, it's another way to reveal the kind of humanity of the characters in this lovely, warm, and touching way. So it is all here, my friends, in this package, this great film, The Flight of the Phoenix, and what a wonderful inclusion this film is into the Criterion Collection. So, my dear friends, this thrilling action adventure human drama, which is The Flight of the Phoenix. The Criterion Collection has released this film, The Flight of the Phoenix, on this new release in 2022. This here is the Blu-ray edition, and it is at spine number 1116, and it is purported to be based on a 2K digital restoration of the film. According to the insert, which I have taken the liberty of taking out of the case prior to this video making. According to the insert, it says, about the restoration, The Flight of the Phoenix is presented in its original aspect ratio of 1.85 to 1. This 2K digital restoration was created from the 35mm original camera negative. The monaural soundtrack was remastered from the 35mm original magnetic tracks, etc. So this is, again, purported to be based on this 2K restoration. And it is a film that I have not seen in the theater, unfortunately, so I have no frame of reference, unfortunately. The only frame of reference that I'm able to have is from, say, previous releases of this film, non-Criterion releases, and I draw your attention, for example, to this Eureka Masters of Cinema Blu-ray release from a few years back, and I'll speak about this momentarily as well when we talk about the supplements. But I must say that based on, despite or perhaps notwithstanding or given that limited, say, resource that I have personally with this film in terms of the visual, say, quality and presentation aspects and various presentations of this film. That being said, I find this to be a very, it looks very sumptuous. Or maybe sumptuous isn't the right word, but maybe what I mean is there is a way in which the color of the presentation really have a type of a solidarity with the actual feel, the visual feel. I mean, and I think it comes out very nicely. For example, in the cover art here, which I'll also talk about, it's brilliant, by the way. You can see that one of the main, or a couple of the main motifs visually of the film is the sky and the sand. And so, and then we have in the middle of that the men and their clothes and their weathered clothes and the scrap metal color of the wreckage, etc. But the among the main motifs visually are the sky and the sand. And so I think this is an example of how well solidified, shall we say, the presentation seems to be to my eyes, and how it works very well. And there's not a sense of distraction, but on the contrary, there's a sense of a type of warmth to the actual image. And so for me, the visual quality and the sound quality of this presentation was, again, to my very admittedly amateur eyes and ears, non-technically sounding eyes and ears, this was to me a very, very welcome presentation indeed. I'm so happy that this was made here for this purpose, for the purpose of this Criterion release. I'm very, very pleased with this this Blu-ray. So that is one aspect that I'd like to speak about here. Now, I'd like to talk then about the release itself, the supplements. And this is where I think the Criterion Collection release might be said to be somewhat lacking in terms of what can be found on paper in terms of the quantity of supplements. We don't have that many in terms of quantity. But again, I do want to stress that each of these supplements is itself very, very welcome, and they're really great, filled with a lot of information and energy and various discussion points. But just note that we do have, maybe compared to other Criterion releases, what it looks like on paper to be a quantity of supplements that might be seen to be noticeably less than other Criterion releases. But let us speak about what they are first. So the first one is a discussion between Walter Hill and Alain Silver. And Alain Silver is a Robert Aldrich biographer, and Robert Aldrich and the Flight of the Phoenix. And this is a great conversation between these two gentlemen. It is described as being from 2021, 19 minutes approximately, and we have so many things talked about here. You know, one of the very key aspects of this film is, of course, Robert Aldrich himself, and the fact that he is seen to be, on the one hand, maybe on the cusp of a lot of things. Maybe on the one hand, he is coming from the legacy and culture of Hollywood movie making. From the 1950s into the 1960s. But at the same time, one might say, and I think these gentlemen address this really well, is how he can also be seen to be, in many ways, a type of, for lack of a better phrase, a maverick, independent-willed filmmaker. And even those traits come through in a film like The Flight of the Phoenix, which might seem to some to be maybe a type of Hollywood film on the one hand, but at the same time, there are maverick elements in terms of the storytelling, in terms of the unexpected twists of character development, etc., that make for really engaging work. And I think these points are touched upon so well and so brilliantly between these during this conversation. So what is brought up, for example, is the career of Robert Aldrich and how his, say, filmography seems to suggest this idea of this balance between maybe blockbuster entertainment from especially blockbuster entertainment in the 50s and 60s on the one hand, but also a sense of the independent drive and style. And so and almost to the extent of being maybe brilliantly poetically quirky aspects to his filmmaking, film choices. So, for example, Whatever Happened to Baby Jane, Kiss Me Deadly, 10 Seconds to Hell, Dirty Dozen, etc. So, and then we have The Flight of the Phoenix, also mentioned here. So, this is a very important point that's raised. So we have the filmography that's set up to provide the context for the Robert Aldrich film discussion. And then we have other aspects of Robert Aldrich's filmmaking that is mentioned here. So Joseph Bierock is referred to, the director of photography, and Frank Duvall is mentioned here, or Duvall in terms of music. So Duvall or Frank Duvall, and so Michael Luciano as the editor, etc. So these are examples of collaborators, artistic collaborators that Robert Aldrich has worked with, and so we have that great contribution. So a type of cinema troupe, as it were, and of course this also extends to the performers that he's working with here in The Flight of the Phoenix, and that great rapport and engagement. And this is again a reflection of the overall working style and habits of Aldrich, and so he's able to attract this great attention from the acting field. So Peter Finch is mentioned, Dan Duryea is mentioned, and Ernest Borgnine is mentioned, etc. So this is a great setup, or great, say, foundational discussion point conversation with regard to an overview of Robert Aldrich's career. So already, for those who are maybe new to the world of Aldrich, this is a great primer starting point. And then for those who are familiar with Robert Aldrich, this becomes a wonderful, yet another opportunity to celebrate the legacy of this filmmaker in the context of The Flight of the Phoenix. Speaking of The Flight of the Phoenix, we should mention too that the conversation then turns to specific aspects of the production details, the creative process. The novel is mentioned. This is the Alston Trevor novel, and then the Lucas Heller adaptation. And how the novel seems to have been there were, relatively speaking, maybe not so many changes made to the overall structure of the novel itself. And so this also adds to a sense of how this film, The Flight of the Phoenix, really fits into the Robert Aldrich filmography quite nicely. It's a film, it's a Hollywood kind of, I like this phrase, it's a Hollywood kind of film that doesn't compromise. And I think that's a really wonderful way of describing this film, and indeed Robert Aldrich as a filmmaker himself. Some points that are brought up in terms of the ways in which this film or the story needed to be adapted for purposes of a cinema storytelling is how to deal with, excuse me, certain specifics of engineering. As some of you, as those of you who've seen the film can attest to, one of the aspects of the film and the plot is the focus on engineering and engineering aspects. And so what's interesting here is I think this film does a really great job of keeping the essence of the importance of those specific engineering points, the construction, the design aspects, the actual construction, etc. Those points become not just they're very technically oriented, of course, but they're also crucial to the plot. So I really like that, how they are not, they are of course very essential, but they are also revealed in a way that is still engaging and consistent with the plot. So I love this very much about this. In other words, these are technical points, but they are presented in a way that are still very easily digestible and comprehensible to general cinema audiences. So this is great. Another aspect too is that this film is quite a complex plot, a complicated plot, as these two gentlemen attest to. But at the same time, there is a sense of grounded accessibility from the viewpoint of audiences, because it is a potentially complicated plot with all these moving parts and the characters and various subplots, various machinations, various movements, but it's all taking place essentially in one setting. And so that, I think, gives a sense of balance. Maybe this one setting maybe allows for the ease of accessibility on the part of the viewer in order to access these various ensemble moving parts that are occurring almost perhaps simultaneously or almost at once. So this is a really interesting point as well. And what's great too that is being mentioned in this conversation is in the film The Flight of the Phoenix, each character seems to be getting his chance to shine, as it were. There is a sense, of course, this film is have maybe it feels like it does focus on maybe some characters over others. That's one way to interpret it. But another way to look at it, of course, is this is an ensemble work, and indeed it does reflect that ensemble spirit. Because I think I agree with the discussion here, which is the film does allow for this balance among all of the various characters, and that each has a moment to shine, or maybe in some cases a number of moments to shine. So this is a really great thing. Also, in terms of the aspect of Aldrich's filmmaking and no compromise, what's brought up here is the idea of the way in which characters interact and their emotional outbursts that are expressed in these great understandable moments of dialogue and interaction. And that makes it even more engaging in terms of the human drama aspect. And also reversal of expectations. There are some characters that seem to be set up from the get-go that, based on, say, expectations of genre or Hollywood entertainment, etc., one, as a viewer, one might expect this quote unquote type of character to have this type of arc going forward, or certain expectations that are actually subverted in these really intriguing ways. And so some characters that you think might, say, due to certain genre expectations, go one way, end up going a completely different way. And so that adds, I think, not just to the no compromise spirit of Aldrich, but it also adds to the suspense and tension of the film, because it is also a type of survival or disaster film. And in this type of unexpected route change, one doesn't know what will happen at the end, and that becomes really enthralling and thrilling and engaging indeed. So this is a great aspect here as well. And in the context here, we're speaking about the various characters. Hardy Kruger's character is a really important character, as we know, and that type of key element to the plot, as well as the way in which this character interacts with the many other characters, including, of course, maybe one of the highlight relationships of the film, the relationship between him and the James Stewart character. So, then this conversation then turns to the legacy of this film, the kind of Aldrich's filmmaking style, and they describe how it was just a relatively smooth production on schedule, maybe not so financially successful upon initial release, but it has this long-lasting legacy in the context of many things, including as a James Stewart film, as an action-adventure film, as a Robert Aldrich film, and now as in terms of many releases going forward, including one of the most recent ones being from Criterion. So all in all, this is a great discussion. So great. Again, for those who are new to Robert Aldrich, or those who are familiar with Robert Aldrich, whatever the case may be, this is a great discussion indeed, also in the context of The Flight of the Phoenix. So this discussion, Walter Hill and Alan Silver, approximately 19 minutes. And that's not all, because the second supplement is called James Maitland Stewart, the Actor and the Bomber Pilot. This is a discussion with Donald Dewey, who is a James Stewart biographer and expert, from 2021, approximately 18 minutes. And again, one of the great aspects of this film, The Flight of the Phoenix, is its cast and its ensemble. And among that ensemble cast is, of course, the legend that is James Stewart. So it's great to have a supplement that's focusing here on James Stewart and his background, because not only are we talking about James Stewart featuring in this film, his character, Frank Towns, is a pilot. And so this leads to a wonderful link with the biography of James Stewart, because he was a pilot, as Donald Dewey tells us or reminds us. We are also reminded how this character is in many ways a type of departure from quote unquote James Stewart's comfort zone as an actor, in terms of the real vulnerabilities that are on display with this particular character, and also the ensemble that he is working with, which is another aspect that's really fascinating and engaging. We're talking about actors who are maybe not necessarily, they're not all American actors, but they are from, there are some important European actors or British actors that he's also working with. So it's a real international ensemble cast. And so and it's an all male cast, or almost all male cast, I should say. And there are no sort of long monologue scenes per se, and no necessarily sudden scenes of intense emotional breakdown per se, although at the same time, there are moments of, say, revealed emotional vulnerability. So in these ways, Don Dewey expresses how this might be seen to be part of maybe a natural trajectory of James Stewart's acting career, but at the same time, examples or revelations about how this might be said to be quite different from the types of roles that we might have been used to in terms of James Stewart's great and long and illustrious career, dating all the way from 4 decades leading up to The Flight of the Phoenix. So this is a very important point to keep in mind. So it is a James Stewart role, but at the same time, it feels like a different type of James Stewart role. And indeed, this might be part of the trajectory of the types of roles James Stewart was having in his films during this period and indeed beyond. So this is a really important point to keep in mind. And then we're speaking too about the military career of James Stewart. He was, in terms of his background, in terms of the military and pilot and the wartime, and how this was also very much part of his character as well. It's a key part of his character, but also there are some interesting anecdotes revealed about the James Stewart and Hardy Kruger in the context of say, James Stewart's efforts during the war and as a pilot. So, and again, this is such a key aspect because it has this way of merging art and life in this way that makes the film so engaging. In other words, that we know that James Stewart has this pilot experience, and as wartime pilot experience, makes his Frank Towns feel all the more legendary, because it becomes James Stewart that we are watching in this great way that these iconic legends of cinema can feel to us as viewers. So I think for these and other reasons, I think this discussion is really key and instrumental and quite informative in terms of one of the very important aspects of the success of this film, namely the James Stewart performance in The Flight of the Phoenix. So well done for being able to include this. So please check this out if you can. James Maitland Stewart, the actor and the bomber pilot, approximately 18 minutes. And then to conclude with the supplements, there is the trailer for the film that's included. So we have, as we have mentioned, or as I've mentioned, in terms of quantity on paper, it might seem like there is maybe only these supplements. So that is something to consider if you're thinking about getting this or not. But as I also tried to suggest, I think what we do get, these 2 discussions in particular, I think are well worth it in terms of examining different facets of the film, The Flight of the Phoenix. And let me add, too, that I've also taken the liberty, as I said, to remove the leaflet, the insert. It is a fold-out type, and I'm not a fan of the fold-out type, as I've mentioned in prior discussions, but the essay is very, very excellent. It's Fight or Flight by Gina Telaroli. And this talks about a number of aspects of the film. Again, I recommend that if you see the film first and then you can read the essay, because it does go into some specifics about the film itself. So, but after you've seen the film, this is a great read. It does talk about a number of aspects of the film, the themes themselves. It also goes into, say, the position of Aldrich in the context of the sweep of, say, American cinema history, etc., in the context of Hollywood filmmaking, and also in an interesting way, a type of independent spirit to his filmmaking, and again, in the context of the sweep of American cinema, etc., as well as his career, and once again, bringing it back to the Flight of the Phoenix for that discussion. So, Fight or Flight, this is a very excellent essay, and it's well worth checking out. So please, that's another great resource for purposes of the exploration of this film, The Flight of the Phoenix. Let me say, too, that there is also a very cute insert that is included as part of the say the fun aspects of physical media collecting in this particular release. And I wasn't aware of this until I opened it to discover that there is another card here. And I don't want to show too much detail because actually it might be said to be, there's a little bit of a maybe kind of semi-spoilerish type of thing. So I don't want to show too much of it. But there is this type of card, and you'll find that it has these cutouts, and you can punch them out, and you can put together. It looks like you can. This is the opportunity to make a type of cardboard paper type of model of a particular structure that's relevant to the film. So this is a very cool thing as well. Again, one of the, I think, extra added bonus or benefits, if you will, of physical media collecting in the Criterion collection. We don't get this for all of Criterion releases, but every once in a while we get these little added features in addition to, say, the supplements on the disc, or the leaflet, or the insert, or the booklet. So that's a little extra added bonus for purposes of the Criterion release. So check that out if you can. It's really quite interesting. I should also say, too, as a means of maybe just rounding out the discussion, I did mention earlier the Masters of Cinema Eureka release of the film The Flight of the Phoenix right here. And let me say that this release has a really good discussion about the film from Sheldon Hall. Video interview with film historian Sheldon Hall. And so it doesn't have any of the supplements that are included in the Criterion release. So those are Criterion release exclusive. But if you're interested in a different or another take, if you will, on the discussion of Aldrich and the Flight of the Phoenix, this Sheldon Hall discussion is really great. So just to keep that in mind here, in case you're interested. It also has a great essay as well. Let me say also one other thing before I continue on, which is the art. The cover art here. I love this cover art design, and I love the overall aesthetic and look, and the palette, and the drawing, and the rendering, which is continued on with such life and such detail as well in the insert as well. And let me mention here that the art is credited to art director Sarah Habibi, Eric Skillman, illustrations Sean Phillips. I love this. This is there's a lot of detail and a lot of character and energy, and also the embodiment of the film. So well done for purposes of the artwork and cover art display. This is really excellent. What we're getting here with Criterion, again, the main feature, after all, is the film. And the film is incredible. It's thrilling, it's stunning, it's spectacular for the reasons that I've tried to describe here today. So it's all in all, I think, a worth. It's so worth checking out if you haven't already. It's exciting. It's tension filled. It's action packed. And it's a great psychological portrait drama study, as well as a story that's using the confrontations and conflicts and connections between and among these characters, set against the backdrop of this very difficult survival disaster film-like circumstances, and it is so much packed into one fantastic film. This is The Flight of the Phoenix. Okay, my dear friends, so that's it for now. And so until we meet again, please be happy and healthy and well, and please keep on watching a lot of great movies. Thank you so much, as always, for your time. I very, very much appreciate it. Stay strong, stay safe, and cheers.